Welcome to the Backyard Professor videos once again. I'm here in my backyard enjoying a beautiful fall day. There's some water coming right out of this mountain. See the beautiful scenery of the surrounding countryside. Water's coming right out of that mountain. Going right down into Blacktail Lake. There's Blacktail Lake. I'm going to switch gears and talk about the Book of Abraham for a bit. This series of videos, I'm going to share some new, exciting, interesting information and research on the Book of Abraham. Kevin Barney has written a very interesting study on the Book of Abraham. I'll show you the dusting of the snow on these hills. It's getting there. It's October 11th, Saturday, 2009, the first day of the general hunting season. That's why I'm wearing red. You can see the beautiful shoreline there. Some very interesting information on the Papyri and the relationship to the Book of Abraham that Kevin has discussed. And I recognize this theme in my research for the last decade or two. And it's very nice to see that Kevin has also recognized it and written a wonderful article on it that I'm going to share some of his insights in on the this is in the series of the studies in the Book of Abraham, Astronomy, Papyrus, and Covenant. For those of you who do have access to this, it is on the internet. If you've read it before, this series of videos will probably bore the tears out of you, except I have some other information that I can share with you as well. But I'm going to go with Kevin's wonderful study, share with you some themes that we've learned historically, archaeologically, theologically, and philosophically about the ancient Jews and how they did things. And it's not what we think. We've had this basic paradigm that we know how the ancient Jews behaved, and we know what they were doing and how they lived, and so on and so forth. Well, there's some new information on the horizon that Kevin brings out because of the archaeologically discovered text that I think is extremely interesting. Now, Kevin, of course, does get a close-up shot of some of the details of the papyri and some of the assumptions that the Egyptologists and scholars of 1912 made concerning it. And what he does is he backs out from the detailed look and gives us a bigger panoramic historic look of how the Jews were borrowing from the Egyptian sources in order to discuss and understand their own grand patriarchs. And when we back out and get a broader context and a wider view, we get a bigger picture of reality than normal. Barney analyzes very well, in pretty good detail, the interesting 1912 affair from the Reverend Spalding. He shares the assumptions of the scholars and their ideas and why they critiqued the Book of Abraham and why that critique is not valid. The facsimiles and their studies of the facsimiles were published in the Times and Seasons in 1842, and ever since that time, LDS scholars have periodically been really excited. It wasn't until 1967, when the papyri were brought back to the church as a gift, that the LDS scholar Hugh Nibley began discussing a lot of the themes in the facsimiles and the ideas in there. And of course, in the 1912 affair, before the papyri came back, Barney discusses the idea of the scholarship In 1912, the idea was Reverend Spalding gave the facsimiles along with their interpretations to 8 of the world's renowned scholars. Spalding called them Egyptologists. They weren't all Egyptologists. Nibley discussed that. And they, of course, declared his translations as sheer bosh. That's how Budge put it, and others were saying this is absolutely ridiculous. There's nothing accurate. Joseph Smith mistook absolutely every single figure. That was von Bissing. And several of the scholars really railed against Joseph Smith. And the LDS scholars, Osborne Widstow and B.H. Roberts and several of the early brethren in the early 1900s discussed various aspects of that issue. Then the papyri came back in 1967, and Hugh Nibley began his significant interpretations and ideas and themes that he worked on all the way up until his death just a few years ago. And his latest book, The One Eternal Round, I've been told is going to be coming out within the next couple of years. It's an enormous undertaking. Nibley did the work of 20 men, and it's taking 20 men to put all of his sources together and to finish his work on facsimile number 2. Barney, in his article, The Facsimiles and Semitic Adaptation of Existing Sources, this is in the Astronomy, Papyrus, and Covenant compiled by John Gee and Brian Hauglid. This is number 3 in the series of the studies in the Book of Abraham from the Foundation for Ancient Research and Mormon Studies, FARMS, and it was published in 2005, so this is relatively new, 4 years ago. Very significant and interesting developments in various aspects of the Book of Abraham and the facsimiles that we need to pay closer attention to. Barney's article is on the internet, and it's available for free at the FARMS website. I would encourage you to get it and read it so that you can see that I've been using it properly. I'm not going to give you all of the article, of course not. I'm going to digest a lot of it and summarize a lot of it. But I'm going to share the significant discussions that Barney has. His careful, meticulous scholarship really shows through in this one. It's a very significant advance in our understanding of the relationship with the Book of Abraham and the Joseph Smith Papyri. I believe it's well worth understanding. Barney has done a significant work that we should all be grateful for. He says he briefly reviews the Spalding pamphlet, and I'm not going to get into the details of that. One significant factor that the Spalding panel did, however, assume was that the actual papyri that Joseph Smith had was actually written on by Abraham himself, that he actually wrote on that papyri that we now have given back to us in 1967. And that is a blatantly false assumption. Barney says that in order to reconcile this theme of I wrote it by my own hand upon papyrus and the theme that these papyri date to within 100 BC to 100 AD, that's the era, and Abraham, of course, there's no way he was living as a mortal that late in life. In the timeline, I've seen datings of Abraham go all the way back to 2000 BC. The general consensus is a rough sort of approach to the historical frame when Abraham is about 1800 BC in the late Bronze Age. So these papyri are way too late. Way too late for Abraham to have ever touched them or written on them. Barney describes why that's significant. He says that when we reject the facile assumption that the scholars in the 1912 affair held of a autobiographical aspect of the Book of Abraham from the actual papyri that we have right now, we can find other possibilities that are every bit as realistic, and we have historical precedents for discussing these possibilities and understanding these possibilities. One such aspect of this that is so intriguing to me, because this is one thing I noticed well over a decade ago and wrote about on my website, On my Mormonism research site,